Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's begin the TorchLigher series for the month of March. So before getting into the topic, first we have to know what is TorchLigher series and who are called Torchlighters. So Torchlighter is the person who serves God despite of any adverse situations or any conditions that he faces. So such persons are called heroes of faith because they keep their faith without losing instead of in any situations. So there are many heroes of faith according to Bible like Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and there are also people not only from the biblical aspects and around us in the 19th century or 18th century. So today we are going to see one such hero of faith. He is Richard Wumbrand. Coming to his childhood, Richard Wumbrand was also known as Nikolai Ionescu. He was born on March 24, 1909 to Heinrich and Amalia. He was the youngest brother of four brothers in his family. He was born in a small village called Bucharest in Romania, which is a country in Europe. And he was born in a Jewish family. And from his childhood, he had no faith in Lord or what Jesus is, or he doesn't know anything about it. The only thing he was interested in is politics. He was more interested in leftist politics. Leftist politics means like supporting socialism rather than just a secularism. And he was also fluent in 9 languages from his childhood. And coming to his early life, he married Sabina Oster, who was born on July 10th, 1913. She was also from Jewish family, and even she also have no faith in Jesus. And she married Richard at the age of 23 years on October 26, 1936. So to lead the family, Richard started working as a stockbroker. So the newly married young couple, one day they were on their way to vacation and they met a German carpenter. The German carpenter was a person who has faith in God. And seeing the newly married couple, he wanted them to believe Jesus Christ. So he gave them a Bible, but they read again and again and they did not understand anything from it. And the German carpenter and his wife started praying about the salvation of the couple, and they noticed that Sabina started believing Jesus Christ, and he started quoting some of the verses from the Bible, like how Jesus Christ supported and helped the Jewish people. That is from Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6 and 7. For you are people holy to the Lord your God, and the Lord your God has chosen you out of all the people on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. So, believing all of these quotes from the Bible, Sabina came into faith and she brought many other people also into Messiah. And God also wanted Richard to grow more deeper in faith. So, for this purpose, he led Richard to the pastor, Isaac Feinstein, who was at that time leading a Jewish congregation of Christian people. And he noticed the zeal of Richard to grow in Jesus Christ. So as both of them were talking, Richard and Isaac Feinstein, uh, the Holy Spirit deeply touched Richard's heart, and he was kept on crying and weeping loudly that I wanted to see real Jesus. I wanted to see real Jesus. And then the pastor suggested him to stay in prayer for the whole night, and Richard did the same thing, and that night Holy Spirit anointed him, and he also came into the faith of Jesus Christ. So in this way, Sabina and Richard, both of them were baptized, and they have joined an Anglican mission. So they started going to Anglican church in Bucharest in the year 1938. And we know that there are many denominations like in Christianity. So confused by all of these denominations, Richard had only faith in the Bible, and they just started going to the Anglican church in Bucharest. And after an year of taking baptism, Richard and Sabina were blessed with a baby boy. So they named him Michael. So this is the family photo of Richard, Sabina Oster, and Michael. Michael was born in the year 1939. And it was the time of Second World War. So we know that it happened between 1939 and 1945. So at that time, Romania joined hands with Germany because Germany at that time was a leading power during the Second World War. At that time, anti-Semitism grew up. Anti-Semitism is nothing but discrimination against Jewish people just because they are Jewish. So it has nothing to do with any work or anything. So it is because they are Jews, they are born like that. So they were discriminated based upon their race. So all the soldiers and police and mobs, everyone, they thought of wiping the city out. So they don't want any of the Jews to live in that area. So a great massacre took place in Romania on June 27th, 1941. And nearly 14,000 Jewish people were dead in the city alone. And in that massacre, the pastor Feinstein, who was responsible for the salvation of Richard and Sabina's parents, her two sisters, and her brother, everyone were dead among them. So they both of them lost their family, and the constant support for Richard, Pastor Feinstein, he was also dead. And the death of pastor gave the couple more strength to stand for Christ. So with this strength they got from the pastor, they started preaching, and they started doing ministry, and they wanted to bring more people into Jesus Christ and more people into salvation. So what they did is they started preaching in bomb shelters. They were never afraid, or they were not even feared. So they started preaching wherever the God has led them to, and they also rescued the Jewish people from ghettos. Ghettos are nothing but a minority people, the place where minority people live, especially the Jewish people. So they rescued the children from that place. So seeing all of these activities, the communists did not agree to those activities. So Sabina and Richard were arrested, and they were beaten many times for these acts. Despite of all these things, they did not stop their work. Even they spoke of salvation to everyone, including the prison guards and soldiers. So in Russia at that time, communism prevailed the more. Like people used to believe Karl Marx principles, and before Richard and Sabina used to go to Anglican Church, but after the Second World War, he started believing Lutheran principles. So he was reordained as a Lutheran priest, and he became a minister. So at that time, Romania was under the control of Russia. So all the communists and Karl Marx principles were only prevailed in Russia, and they don't want this Christianity to be in first position. So they tried and every method to keep the believers out of state. So what they did is they called each and every preacher to come to a hall and agree only to communism, and they have to like disagree with what is the belief of Christianity or anything that is in against to communism. So one day, one such meeting was held, like that was called Congress of Cults, where all the preachers and all the communists were allowed to take participation. And Richard and Sabina were also allowed to that meeting. And about 4,000 people were there, and the session was broadcasted live throughout the country. And it's like all the preachers and all the Christians, they have to come and they have to say that they are in agree with communism, and they are and they're disobeying showing the disobedience to Jesus Christ, or they're not agreeing with what are the principles of Christianity, and they only support communism. So it was Richard's turn then, and he was also going to the podium to state his faith only towards the communism. But Sabina told him, no, you're not going to do like that. You have to stand up only to what is true and what is right. So she told the same dialogue, like, stand up and wash away this shame from the face of Christ. But Richard did not agree that because he knows the consequences of what happens if he says like that. So Richard denied to do like that. And then Sabina told, so if you are not going to do like that, I don't need a coward for a husband. So Richard was kind of shocked by listening all of these words. He then came strong into the faith of Jesus Christ, and then he declared throughout the meeting, he declared that his loyalty was only to Christ first, and he completely rejected the Karl Marx principles and the communists. Although most of the people, they applauded Richard for uh, doing this activity, but he know that somewhere he know what are the consequences he is going to face, and the consequences started. So he thought that okay, it is no longer safe to stay in that particular place and preach. He thought of constructing an underground church. So here in this photo, we can see an underground church which they built at that time. So they used to gather every Sunday for their worship service. And they also used many tactics for not being caught of doing these activities. So some of the tactics are like they used to publish any Christian pamphlets showing that they are communist propagandas, or they used to cover the booklets with the pictures of Karl Marx just to get approval for the distribution. And in the years between just 1945 and 1947, Richard distributed 1 million gospels to Russian troops. And he also helped in smuggling the Bibles and scriptures to Russia. So he know the danger of what happens if he's going to do all of these things. But he kept his life in danger only just because of him, some of the people should come into salvation, and some of the people should know who is Jesus Christ and what is the purpose of his coming. So with this intention, he started preaching everywhere. And the communists, they thought that it is not safe to keep Richard outside like that, because he's going to influence a lot of people, and he's continuously kept on converting communists into Christianity. So one day, four police officers, when Richard was going to the church, they kidnapped him on February 29, 1948, and they kept him in a solitary jail. Solitary is nothing but only one person is in a single prison, and he can see no one except himself. So the room was 12 feet underground, and it has no lights or windows, and he was labeled as prisoner number one. The reason for labeling him as prisoner number one is that the outside world should know that Richard is dead, he is no more. So, with that fear, the people will start again believing in communism, and they will they will disagree with the Christianity. So, with that intention, they labeled him as just prisoner number one, and no one knows about what happened to Richard. And for 3 years, he was kept in a solitary jail. Even when he was kept in a solitary cell, he used to communicate with other people in the prison by writing something Morse code on the walls, and they used to communicate. And he used to preach in that way too. And after 3 years, he was transferred to group cell, where a mass gathering, like 200 people, used to stay in one room. And his intention at that time was also only to reach gospel to wherever possible. So his work was only preaching and telling everyone about salvation. And like this, he spent 14 years in prison. And Sabina was also arrested, and she was also arrested and for 3 years. And their 9-year-old son, he was forced to live on the streets. But knowing this, some of Richard's friends, Christian friends, took Michael to their home, and they used to take care of him. So during these 14 years, the torture was literally like, so you can see the torture, what happened to him. He was forced to sit straight with just his eyes open, so nothing to eat or drink or do anything. And he was also kept in a small box, and where the ice box, and with some spikes inside. So if the ice melts, the spikes used to poke him, and it used to cause a lot of pain for him. And he also stated that Other prisoners, they faced far worse situations. Like, for example, one person was forced to watch his son beat him to death in front of him, so that this person will agree that communism is the best principle and Christianity is no more. And none of them did what they expected. So no one has the right or anything to say against the communists. But these people, or the Christians who were in the prison, they never disagreed Jesus Christ. They always wanted to preach and bring everyone to salvation. This was not only physical torture during those 14 years, there was also psychological torture. So, what happened was, imagine yourself in a situation where you are locked in a dark room and no one with you, and you are repeatedly hearing the same words like communism is good and God is dead and Jesus is no more, Christianity is stupid. So just by listening all of this over and over, so the torture is like it cannot be expressed in words. And so he endured all of the physical pain and as well as psychological torture for 14 years. And he said that no words to describe that physical pain. Rich, after 8.5 years, he was released from prison in 1956, and he was warned many times not to preach, but he never did that. He always continued his work of preaching, whatever the situation may be. Uh, so he was again arrested in 1959, and he was sentenced to a prison of 25 years. But some of his friends released him again in 1964, and thinking that okay, he will be arrested again and again. So all of these continuous imprisonments he underwent, and his son expelled from 3 colleges, stating that his father was a prisoner. So no one gave him admission as well. And his wife Sabina was also released from prison after 3 years, and she was kept into the house arrest for 5 more years. So the couple endured all of this pain and torture, though they did not, though they were tortured all of like in these methods, they never gave up, and they started preaching continuously, and they were freed at last in the year 1965. And some of the people paid them, offered them money like $10,000 just for the safety, asking them to leave that country and start preaching somewhere else. At first, Richard did not convince by that words, and later he consulted some of the church leaders, and they told him, "Okay, it's better for you now to leave this Romania and become the voice for all of the Christians in the underground church." After convinced by these words, Richard left for Norway along with Sabina and their son Michael, and from Norway they traveled to England. So in all of this journey, their motive was only to preach the gospel to whoever is possible and bring many people into salvation. And he like this, he devoted all of his entire life just only to preach despite of any warnings or death threats. So in this way, first they traveled to Norway and then to England and then to United States of America. So in United States, one day he got a chance and he was called for an interview to state all of the torture and everything that he undergone in those 14 years. So in Washington D.C., he testified everything that he has undergone in front of the U.S. Senate. So he took off his shirt in front of the cameras just to show that scars of his torture, which remained until now on his body. So he showed 18 deep wound tortures that he had on his body. And most of the people after that realized that Jesus is true God, and he kept his faith in God until his last breath. So this thing brought him huge attention from the public, and all of the people started believing in Jesus Christ across the world. And from then he became voice of underground church. So with this intention of doing service and being the voice of other people, he started a work called Jesus to the Communist World. So here in this slide, we can see the voice of martyrs. So this Jesus to the Communist World is later renamed as Voice of the Martyrs. So the main aim of this organization is just to be the voice of all the persecuted Christians over the world. So if you see the website also, it helps us, like it asks people just to donate money only for the Bibles and any primary resources they need. So the one advantage of this is Christians anywhere can participate in this ministry, even in the most restricted nations of the world. So Richard then began this ministry as the voice of the martyrs, like the voice of the persecuted Christians throughout the world. Even this service is now being continued in over 60 countries. So here, if we see in Google, if you type persecution.com, then we will see a page like this, which shows stand with persecuted Christians. So it is asking us like my gift. So we can donate any money or any resources that we are willing to donate to the persecuted Christians throughout the world, so that the right help will be done to them. And continuing this service for 25 years, again from United States, they returned to Romania and their home village, which is Bucharest, for the first time in those 25 years. So his intention from the beginning was to do ministry in his homeland rather than somewhere else. So all of these 25 years prayer came true on that day. So at that time, the communism was not prevailing, and it was the right time for him to start preaching in churches as well as on televisions, as that is a good source of preaching at that time. And the Voice of Martyrs Association, it also opened a printing facility, like to print the books and the Bibles in his own state, Bucharest. And the mayor also realized about Jesus Christ, and he also got to know the truth of him, and he got converted, and he also offered a space for the books to keep Bibles and all the books about Jesus. And in his homeland, when he went, again his work was to do just preaching with local ministries, despite of whatever the denominations they belonged to. So Richard wrote 18 books in English and some other books in Romania. Some of his important works are Christ on the Jewish Road, the story of Richard and Sabina Wumbrand, Snapshots, A Son Remembers His Father, Alone with God, Tortured for Christ, Testimony of Persecution. So among all of these books, Tortured for Christ is the main book, main popular book. Like I think 1.3 million books were sold in 1 year when that book was released. So these are some of his works, and each book describes a particular phase of his life. Suppose, for example, if we see Tortured for Christ, that book alone tells us the torture that he has undergone in those 14 years. And the Christ with Jewish Road, that book tells like the sufferings that he has undergone and how he did the service and how he started preaching. And he also wrote a book called If Prison Walls Could Speak. So how they continued preaching in solitary cell through the Morse code on the prison walls. And his wife Sabina also wrote a book, The Pastor's Wife, showing her testimony and her Christianity life. Now let's just see a small clipping of the videos of Richard and Sabina's interview. So this interview was happened in the year 1989.
There's no audio, Manasa. I think you should stop sharing your screen, start sharing. When you share, just select the option share audio as well.
Oh, so should I stop share now?
Yep, and start sharing again, select share audio.
Or can I play it on YouTube if it doesn't work?
Yep, maybe.
Is that possible?
No,
Yeah,
sir. Unless you select share audio, it won't work. At the bottom, you will have audio sharing.
select share screen and just select the option share audio as well.
Okay.
This is a very special. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
This is a very special This is a very special segment that we've been looking forward to for some time here. So I've asked Moira to join me because we've given lots of time, and I'm interested in Moira's input here as well. Richard Wumbrand is no stranger to many people around the world. He's written several books. I'm holding here perhaps his most famous book, over 3 million copies sold, Tortured for Christ, a story of 14 years of imprisonment in a Romanian prison, mainly because of his stand against Marxist Leninism and the dominating rule of the communist regime in his country. And in writing that book, he suddenly became very, very well known around the world and has written several others. I have one here entitled Alone with God, another one, Christ on the Jewish Road, written by Richard Wumbrand, who is Jewish as well as a believer in Jesus, From the Lips of Children, 100 Prison Meditations, and Marx and Satan. And these books are available in bookstores. I think many of you have seen them in several bookstores in Canada. And so will you please welcome Dr. Richard and Sabina Wumbrand. Welcome, Dr. Wumbrand. There's so much to talk about, and I was saying to you before the program, I have heard of you so often, and this is the first chance I've had to meet you. And I want you to tell me your story. I know you've told it hundreds and maybe perhaps thousands of times before, but many, many people have yet to hear your story. Simply because it's such a remarkable story, and of course you've written this classic book, Tortured for Christ, about it. Can you just give us a sort of a brief overview of your life in a communist prison and why you were there?
Well, one day I walked to the church. I was already a pastor.
This is in Romania?
In Romania, yes. The communists are very at power. And on a Sunday morning I walked to the church. We don't drive to the church because we have no cars. I've never had a car in my life, neither a bicycle. We walked, and then a van of the secret police stopped near me. 4 men jumped out of the car and pushed me inside. I was kidnapped. There are no warrants of arrest or something like this. And I had to disappear from the face of the earth for 14 years. The first thing which occurred into my mind in that moment was that the words "don't fear" occur in the Bible 366 times, once for every day of the year. And because there exists extra day of the leap year, it is not 365 times, but 366. And I've been kidnapped on the 29th of February. And I said to myself, well, I have motives not to fear. Yeah. This day is also covered, and I began to smile. Now, when I began to smile, they got frightened because they had to submit me to interrogations, and they believed that I've gone mad. Now, who smiles when the communists kidnapped him? They believed that I had a nervous shock. They asked me, why do you smile, sir? I said, because of the promise which I have. What promise do and since they were very sure that I've gone mad, we had this promise that we don't have to fear. And Jesus is a gentleman. He has told us that we don't have to fear, and he keeps his words. There were nothing to be feared.
Now, if I can just ask you this. You were married at the time?
Surely.
Did you have children?
Yeah, I had children.
Now, Mrs. Wumbrand, he wasn't fearing. What about you? How did you feel about this? Did you know that your husband had been kidnapped, or did it take a few days to discover?
How I felt. Thousands and thousands of women, Christian women, were in the same situation as I was, many times in tears, no possibility of any work because the husband was in prison, the children from the school just thrown out. How I felt at this time, it was a very, very hard time, and very soon afterwards, as the Christian women took the place of the Christian men in church, while the men were put in prisons, the Christian women came forward and took their place in the church. The communists were not prepared for it. When they saw that the Christian women meant it, that they loved the Lord and they worked in the place of the men, very soon thousands of women were arrested, and among them I myself went to prison, but surely not in the same prison. In another prison, and so years and years we did not know and not see each other.
I was going to ask that question. Were you able to communicate at all?
14 years we did not know about each other.
So you didn't know if you were alive or dead?
No, we knew. She was told officially that I have hanged myself in prison. They wish to produce in her depression and melancholy. But I have a little bit to modify what she has said. We don't always feel compassion for a man. You can't feel compassion for everybody, but we have to show compassion. We can't feel always joyous, but we have to show our joy in the Lord. She wept and she had this sadness. After 8 years in jail, I met for the first time a brother who had been recently arrested and asked him, do you know something about my wife? She had been released in the meantime. I asked, do you know something about my wife? Yes, I have been in your home. I saw your wife. And I asked, what is my wife doing? He said, she smiles and she sings. There was another side. She also wept and had her sadness, but she knew it is her duty to show and to communicate to others joy. In this connection,
So I know it's 20 minutes video, so I just played only the first 5 minutes. So after that, I think everybody can watch that entire video. So that first part was just to show they struggle in that 14 years. They did not met even once, and they don't know either each other person is alive or dead. So that's the reason for me just to show that 5 minutes of video. And so that interview took place in the year 1989, and on August 11, 2000, Sabina went home to the Lord. And exactly after a year later, just a month before Richard's 92nd birthday, he was also reunited with her wife in heaven. So despite all of this torture and hardship the world could throw at them, the Wumbrands, Richard and Sabina, they stood firm to the end in their devotion, just only to service to Jesus Christ, and they left a legacy for the rest of us to follow. So he wrote a quote in one of his books: our lives are planned in eternity, our lives serve God's purpose. So when we serve God's purpose, that is the true meaning of our lives, and that is the true meaning of our life. So that is the one we can learn from Richard and Sabina. Thank you.
Thank you, sister. Thank you for sharing with us about Richard Wumbrand, this great man of God, who has been an example for us, and he has endured torture and lived